And we are live. Hey everybody, I'm Jay-Z sitting in for Tyler today, and this is Decred Assembly. We've got a great guest, Jake Yocom-Piatt, JYP, Decred project organizer, head honcho at Company Zero, and we're going to be talking about all sorts of stuff today. Proposal system, the call for contractors, and a bunch of questions from some of our Redditors. Jake, welcome.
It's a pleasure to meet up with you, Jonathan. I think this is the first one of these you've done, and it seems like you're delivering right on point. And it's always a pleasure to be back, even with different hosts.
Matt's been grooming me. I guest hosted on one of them. Hopefully this won't be a regular thing because he's on hiatus, but I'm trying to walk a fine line here between doing a good job and making him proud and bombing hard enough so that he comes back. So
yeah, no, I've run into that same situation myself in the past with with certain people. Once you set the safety net too high for some people, they just don't want to fix it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's get started. I want to start off with some Decred news before we get into some of the bigger topics. So recently, Decred's been added to a UQuid debit card, so that we're on two debit cards now, UQuid and Wirex. We recently launched the Decred website in like 10 languages, so that was pretty cool. And we got about another 10 going. So anyone out there who's got language skills, wants to come help us translate the website, the documentation, we're looking for people. So that's that. And let's dive into some of this stuff now. First, I want to pick your brain on something, though, because everyone's talking about the Bitcoin Cash stuff. And I think, yeah.
Okay.
It dovetails nicely with Decred because, I mean, this type of stuff is not supposed to happen, right? Everyone seems to be really excited about it, though. Like, hey, they're spinning off new Bitcoins. I'm getting free money when this is actually, kind of a disaster. So I wanted to pick your brain on that. Any general thoughts? I mean, going from having one type of Bitcoin to two to maybe three in November, it's not exactly confidence inspiring. Honestly, the market seems to like it, but what are your thoughts?
I mean, my thought is that, Bitcoin and the Bitcoin sort of domain really has so much branding and, a sufficiently large network of its own that even when there are these, spin-offs that are basically occurring, it's like, the number of people who watch, Cop Drama X, you wonder, do the number of people who watch Cop Drama X go up when there's the Special Victims Unit in Miami and the Special Victims Unit in San Francisco? And it's a hard question to answer because for some, in some cases, it's just going to basically fracture the community and be a really destructive thing. But for Bitcoin, maybe it could be a good thing. But my sense of it is that if nothing else, to me, what Bitcoin Cash and these, the coming SegWit 2x fork and all of this demonstrates is that it's very easy for conflicts to arise in the context of consensus changes.
Yes.
So, like we've seen in Decred, right? The engineering that we put in was basically to make sure what is happening to Bitcoin right now does not happen to Decred. So that basically, if somebody really wanted to, they could fork Decred off and change all the consensus rules and so on. But by doing that, you basically kill the network effect in a way that with a proof of work currency, you don't. So I see the community kind of breaking up, but because of Bitcoin's network effects, what this leads to a whole bunch of extra attention in the media, which then brings in new investors. At the same time, the community is splintering. So, in terms of a value proposition, I think that, if everyone keeps paying attention to the drama, it could be a good thing in the sense that it draws more people in. But it's bad in the sense that, it's inevitable that consensus rules are going to change over time. People are going to find optimizations, they're going to find improvements, and then they're going to want to get them implemented. And if you don't have a reasonable way for people to reach a consensus on what the consensus rules should be, then you're sort of you might end up with a system that has no value in it at the end of the day. So it's like I see it sort of like they're treading water right now, but the long story arc here is that this is bad because this could keep happening. Yes. And if it keeps happening, then the whole thing could break up.
they're basically diluting Bitcoin's brand, essentially. Once you have 3-4 types of Bitcoin, I mean, that first mover advantage in brand recognition is one of their greatest assets. And while people are happily dancing while, Rome is burning because, hey, they wanted to dance and traders want to trade and speculators want to speculate, eventually the music's going to stop and, everything's on fire. But yeah, maybe we should talk a little bit about Decred and how the ticket system specifically prevents stuff like this from happening, because I just noticed, and we hit a new milestone, I think we're at about 41% of coins locked in POS, which Dave Collins has been talking about this for a while. He expects it to keep inching up there towards probably around 50 or maybe even more. But I think it's a great vote of confidence for the network, and it is securing the network as well. So a lot of people don't know this. So can you talk a little bit about the proof of stake system and how this specifically prevents the kind of stuff we're seeing now in Bitcoin with Bitcoin Cash and SegWit 2x?
Sure. And so the way we engineered the hybrid proof of work, proof of stake was such that the cost of, so let's say there's a hard fork change and it's proposed. Let's say it was something like add or don't add SegWit. In the case that this happens, Decred has a system where basically you need 75% or more of the votes during a voting period to be yes in order to confirm a change. So like let's say we were in Bitcoin shoes and we didn't have SegWit and we were talking about adding the SegWit soft fork. Instead of making a soft fork where the proof of work miners just amongst themselves settle it or don't settle it, as the case may be, what we do is that everyone votes. And if enough of the votes that are tallied are yes in a voting period, which is roughly 4 weeks, then the rule will activate another 4 weeks after the vote ends. And what this does is this, combined with a couple other consensus rules that we have in Decred, make it so that it is prohibitively expensive, from a proof of work mining perspective, to continue a minority chain. Like let's say that we had a similar thing as to what's going on in Bitcoin. Let's say 80% of the people voted yes for SegWit and 20% voted no. What can happen, right, is these 20% who voted no could be very upset and go, and chafe and I want it the other way. I wish everything was the way it used to be, and so on. And those people can be upset, but the upshot is if they want to fork off of the Decred chain, they would basically, if they're only trying to change that consensus rule, they are in a very messy situation, because what ends up happening is that to validate new blocks, not only do you need the proof of work to actually mine the block, which could be a problem depending on how the proof of work stuff splits across one of these votes, but you also need the tickets to make these votes. So what can happen is that chain one continues this way, and then the other chain starts to go, and what will happen is that you need at least 3 votes on a block in order for it to be considered valid. So 3 out of 5.
It's basically two-factor authentication for your blockchain.
Exactly. And so without that second factor of authentication, the cost of mining fresh blocks that have a second authentication factor stamp on them becomes prohibitively expensive. So in the case where we have this 75% threshold, the reason we chose that is because it creates a 10x or roughly 10x multiplier on the cost of maintaining a minority chain. So basically, rather than try to rule out minority chains entirely, what we've done is we've taken the Bitcoin approach, and we said we're going to try to make it prohibitively expensive to do something that we don't think should be done.
And these are people with skin in the game. I mean, ticket holders are people who have put out money and locked it up specifically to participate in your governance model. So, you're not going to have someone just trying to rock the boat for kicks, right? Or making noise just to see what happens. There's significant money invested in making sure that this works.
Exactly. And I mean, the problem that you encounter with, say, Bitcoin or proof of work currencies is that a proof of work miner may have an enormous capital expenditure to get their computer, their specialized mining hardware up. So they may be dumping hundreds of millions of dollars into their mining operations, but those people are by no means obligated to hold any Bitcoin. So basically,
a lot of them probably just care about short-term ROI, right? They just want to ROI that hardware as fast as possible, and to hell with the long-term
exactly
of the network, right?
Yeah, and and as anyone who's been in the computer industry, especially in the hardware game, realizes it's extremely capital intensive. So, you don't even really have the luxury of sort of kicking back and going like, oh, I'm going to relish in my profits. It's like, well, you got to reinvest now. You got to make the faster ASIC to compete with the other guy who's building that ASIC that's faster than yours, and so it becomes an arms race. And I think that if you're engaged in that arms race and you don't hold any coins, I don't think you really should have that huge a say in what the future of the currency really is.
There's a lot of that, people with no skin in the game, or, a very short-term view, and, they're on Reddit, they're on social media being the loudest, and you think, hey, these guys have a huge following, right? Listen to all the noise they're making. But in reality, there's really no way of gauging how much they are actually invested into their ideas, because there's no mechanism for that in Bitcoin, right?
Exactly, and it's the same problem with the user-activated soft fork, which is that people were like, oh, let's we'll count the number of full nodes that people are signaling for the user-activated soft fork, and it's like you can Sybil attack that all day. That was the whole point of making Bitcoin require one CPU, one vote. So
I remember there were scripts for that you could spin up like 1,000 AWS nodes, and oh, look at that, now we're all for XT or Classic or Core. It was arbitrary.
I mean, who knew bussing people in on the internet would be so much more efficient?
Yeah. Sad but true. But you guys at Company Zero are originally Bitcoin devs, right? You guys created the Golang implementation of Bitcoin, BTC Suite. So you guys have a lot of experience with how that works, and essentially some of the pitfalls that come from that. I mean, I always thought, I followed BTC Suite for a long time, and I always figured, hey, eventually maybe we'll move away from that, reference implementation, and, start with a solid base and add things like, privacy to Bitcoin, some kind of governance. But no, it hasn't been the case. Bitcoin essentially has stagnated for half a decade, right?
Yeah, and I think that, if you look at other ecosystems like Ethereum, I think that, even though I have my own misgivings about Ethereum, I feel like their ecosystem is much healthier in the sense that there's at least a couple implementations of of the core network, so that it's not just a question of, well, we have a monoculture and people who run the monoculture say A, B, or C should happen. There's a diversity of opinions, and then at least to some extent people can meet in the middle, as opposed to one person just saying this is how it is and it'll be this way forever.
I know that's something you and the devs have talked about a lot, having other implementations, and that kind of dovetails into our next topic, the proposal system and the call for contractors, because a lot of people don't know, and especially when you talk to them for the first time, even if they're a little familiar with cryptocurrency, Decred has something pretty special about it, the dev subsidy. And that's kind of, some people have misgivings for it because they don't understand it, right? They think it's kind of like a genius tax with some other coins, whereby, that dev subsidy is going to your bank account every month. But we actually have a fund that will eventually be controlled by a DAO that the coin holders will decide what to fund, correct?
That is right. And, sort of in the interim, we have Decred Holdings Group LLC, it's a centralized conventional corporate entity acting as the steward for these funds until the DAO is ready. When we launched, we really obviously we're like, oh, it'd be great if we could make this thing all headless and amazing from zero. But, there's, anyone who's spent any time really working on this stuff, it's complex and it's non-trivial to basically, make a headless organization, as, even the people who invented Bitcoin can see.
Well, and it's a lot of money, right? I think there's something like 359,000 Decred, which at about $26.50 now is like 9.5, let's say 10 million bucks. So you don't want to make mistakes with something like that. I think we learned that from the DAO, right?
Yes, exactly. I mean, the stakes are high here, and we don't treat this like a casino. We treat this like, basically mission critical hardware. It has to be built right. If if it's poorly built or hastily built, sure, we might be able to, pump quicker, hype quicker. But the reality is that, just like we saw with the DAO, an exploit in any of this infrastructure can have, serious consequences, like, basically people having to hard fork changes out, or, rewrite the past, or whatever you want to call it. it's very, very important to do it correctly. And the proposal system is a key part of that, you know, in that it will allow people to basically in a as censorship proof a way as possible, you know, make their ideas known to the community in a formal way that we can't go backwards in a race. Like, let's say somebody makes an idea or, you know, proposes an idea we don't like. We can't go back in time and then just like wipe it out and be like, what idea?
Okay, let's talk a bit about that, because I think that's a really interesting feature now. The proposal system, I know the back end is close to complete, correct?
That is right. Actually, as of today, I would say today or in the next couple days, the back end will be complete. And what's going on right now is we're finishing up some test coverage. Marco is writing negative test coverage to make sure that when you tickle it or you break the system, it actually does break, as opposed to you break it and then it's like, no, everything's hunky-dory. So that's where it's at in terms of, you know, like you know, progress wise. But you know, the system it's almost ready to be shared.
Okay, so let's walk through a theoretical example. I'm a dev. I have some coding skills as opposed to, you know, being some guy who can't code his way out of a wet paper bag, and I want to write a Rust implementation of Decred.
Okay.
Now, let's say I'm a small holder. I don't have a ton of coins. I make a proposal. What does the process look like, and how does it get to an on-chain vote finally?
Okay, let's see how succinctly I can describe this. I don't have any talking points here, so this is a little ad-libbed. Okay, so the way this process would work is as follows: anyone who's a member of the community who has an idea that they think is good, whether it's dev related or not, can submit through the system. What we're going to do is we're going to have a small denial of service, you know, meter that we're going to integrate into this, where in order to exactly, so we're going to have a fee that's attached to proposal submissions. This way, you can't just have somebody, you know, drive up and cram the suggestion box full, you know.
Is it refundable if it gets accepted?
That is in the cards. So
beautiful.
If you have a good proposal, you attach a fee to it to get, you know, to sort of get past the bouncer and to make sure that, you know, you're not just cramming the box full of junk. Then if we like the proposal, and by we I mean the stakeholders, mm-hmm. we will end up refunding this. So basically, it's not, we don't need these funds. These funds are just for essentially denial of service prevention and spam prevention. So let's say you have your great idea, you write it down. We would restrict it so that only simple proposals can be submitted. You can submit things like markdown files and PNGs, let's say, you know, PNG image files. Then you submit those into the system. You hit the button. It'll say, you know, make a payment here to make sure that you know, you're not spamming us. You make your payment. Then your proposal would have to be reviewed. Now, the reason that your proposal has to be reviewed is, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot one other step. Before the review commences, what there is that there is a token given to the user who submitted the
censorship token.
Exactly. Correct? And so what the idea with this token is that on a lot of subreddits, especially say, you know, the Bitcoin subreddit, excuse me, and RBTC, you know, sort of on the other side of the coin, we see an enormous amount of censorship. People just, you know, there's certain things you're not allowed to type in there. People will get shadow banned. And I just think it's overall a very bad thing. And what I find so insidious about censorship is that censorship is one thing when it's transparent, right? To be like, I'm censoring you because you're saying something super racist or, you know, super offensive, or, you know, it makes religious people upset. There's some motivation and people can see why you did it. It's like, okay, I see why you did that. But the way it happens online is censorship is silent. You know, oh, I don't like that post, delete or hide or shadow ban. So we don't want to go that route where we have this sort of silent censorship. What we're going to do is we're going to give a token to everybody who submits a proposal. And like, let's say you submitted a proposal and it's full of, I don't know, just a bunch of super racist nonsense, just to give you a hyperbolic example of something that we probably don't want to have publicly as part of a proposal system. So we receive this proposal, we give you a censorship token, then the proposal gets reviewed, and what we're going to have to do is, you know, as a community, we're going to have to build a set of rules that, you know, of what goes into a reasonable proposal. You know, if it's super religiously charged, super racially charged, you know, like there's these other buckets, you know, like, or, you know, just sort of if it's just meant to troll people. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of these buckets where it's just not going to be a constructive part of the proposal system. However, even in those cases, I think it's important to give the people who submit it a token so that they can demonstrate that we censored their proposal. So that's sort of the first step, right? You submit your proposal, you get your token. If we censor it, you can hold up your token and go, aha, these guys censored.
It's a badge of honor. I expect there to be a liquid market, aftermarket for these tokens.
Oh, you mean the rare Pepe censorship token?
Yeah.
Okay. So, oh man. Okay, so it gets submitted, and what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to develop a system for doing sort of a first pass review of these proposals. And by first pass, I mean just the basics. Is it full of nonsense? Does it have a request for funds? What kind of request for funds does it have? Does it explain what the funds are being used for? Sort of just the basics, to the point where it's not even a question of rendering a judgment on it. It's a question of, is this a well-formed proposal? So that's the first step, and we'll develop a set of rules over the next several months for these things. Then after that, assuming it passes muster, then it shows up in the public proposal system. The public proposal system would basically be a Git repository that's made public, and I'll add the details on how, the extra bits that we've added to it later on, just because I'm focusing on the workflow right now. So you pass your first, you pass the first approval. Then what would happen is that it would look, roughly speaking, from a user experience standpoint, like a pull request on GitHub. That is, you've submitted your proposal and said, hey guys, here's my proposal. Then everyone, who's on the proposal, the proposal system site or page can then comment on it to be like, I think this, I think that, what about this? And then basically give you feedback. And then at the same time, what would happen is that this proposal would get active review by someone who works in the domain that the proposal is relevant to. For example, you were talking about a Rust implementation. The sort of thing that would have to happen is that before we would agree to fund the work being done to make the Rust implementation, the people who work in our development group would need to look at your proposal, from a technical standpoint to go, are they being reasonable about the lead times here? What about, how much work is this going to take? How many devs are you going to have? And all of these sort of more technical domain specific questions that come up. And I mean, the same thing might happen in the context of marketing. Like someone says, we should run this paid campaign to do A, B, or C. Well, the developer group isn't really in a very good position to judge whether or not that is a great idea or not, but the people in the marketing group, specifically in the advertising group, would be in a good position to judge that and give feedback. So there's sort of these two steps.
Panel of experts, right? So, and I assume we might even pull some from outside the community, people, who are in the industry and could vet these things, kind of the way a scientific journal might have a panel pulled from all sorts of places.
Exactly, like a standard. It's sort of like a standards committee, but more from a just sort of a practical nuts and bolts standpoint, rather than it being very ethereal and and out in the oh, I don't like your proposal. It would be like, who's going to do this? How much money is it going to cost? Like, is that reasonable? Are we already doing something just like this? And so on. So, an outside we'd welcome outside members to these panels and so on. But there's those two steps of the review. So basically, assuming that eventually, there's feedback going on, and then you get past your first review, then your technical review comes back and they're like, oh, you need to change some things, or you need to sort of fill in some blanks. There's some spots in your proposal that are missing. So you'd update your proposal. Then after the technical review is done, and then the proposal has been revised, at a certain point, then it would be ready to be voted on. Now, in terms of how these votes would happen is we're going to implement a thing called snap voting, where if you take a snapshot of the ticket pool as of the block that this vote, starts, and then you freeze that copy of the ticket pool for 1 week, or it could be longer. It depends. I think 1 week is it's a rough number. It gives people like 7 days to vote on proposals. And then what would happen is that you vote up and down, and maybe not everybody's going to vote. In fact, I would be surprised if everyone votes. But let's say, 80% of the people vote. So 80% of the stakeholders vote on this snap vote. Then all of those votes would be recorded in the proposal system. So that basically we have the original submission, the comments, the technical, the technical review, the comments from the technical review, the updates to the proposal. Then we would have an actual, off-chain vote on the proposal. So the way this would work is that the proposal system will only accept votes that fit into this, snapshot vote. Then, assuming all that passes, then what we would do is that, now this is the part that we haven't gotten, that we really haven't gotten to yet, is ultimately a positive vote would have an effect on on-chain funds. So basically, at the end of all this voting process, like a lot of it occurs off-chain. Then there's a final on-chain transaction to release the funds from the development organization.
And this could be done in tranches, I assume, for a big project that might take 6 months.
Exactly. So basically, the details of how the funds are released is going to dictate what we can and can't do. Just like you pointed out, like let's say we budget, $1 million for project X, and then month by month people keep billing. They bill 50,000, 60,000, 70,000, 50,000. They keep billing variable amounts of money over, let's say, a year period to get a project done. They might end under budget, or they might go over budget. So basically, the process for unlocking these funds is going to have to be flexible enough to accommodate these potential budget under and overruns. So it's it's one of these things where we don't have the process worked out yet for the on-chain release of funds, but that's really where the whole thing's going. So from soup to nuts, that's really how it works. And then in the special case that we're talking about a consensus change proposal, what would happen is that it would be voted on via a snap vote, and then or we might not even have a snap vote for something that's as big as a consensus change. But then once it sort of passes muster and gets up to a certain point, then it becomes an on-chain vote. So it gets essentially promoted to an on-chain vote. And we're going to be selective about what we do on-chain votes with, because it's a lot of data to record on-chain. So not every change is going to go to an on-chain vote. Typically, it'll be restricted to consensus changes, but everything else would go through this off-chain system, and then there'd be an on-chain release of funds component to it. So that's really sort of the big picture of the proposal system and how it would work.
I think it's very interesting, and the whole idea of not having to actually have the overhead of the on-chain vote while still being tethered to it's pretty cool. And I know that ties in with the work you guys have done on DCR time, and Marco was talking a bit about that last time. But let's move more towards the actual contracting process, because you put up a post recently on the call for contractors, and it attracted a lot of attention and a lot of questions as well from some people on Reddit, our Redditors, who I guess reading is hard, so they'd rather have a nice video response explaining the whole thing. So since we have you on video, hey, why not, right? So yeah, let's talk about some of the things that we're looking for. You called for contractors. We're looking for all sorts of devs, right?
That is right. We're looking for developers. We're looking for marketing people. We're looking for people who specialize in sort of, connecting with, celebrities and exchanges online. There's a whole bunch of different positions that we're trying to fill. And, because we're an open source project, we could try to run this like a company and really just staff everybody and hire it and have it all be top down. And then there's a top dog and there's a bottom dog and, the usual stuff. But we're trying to shake that up in the sense that in the long run, once we don't have someone like me to steer the ship, we need to have a system that's sustainable and, allows people to, continue working without this idea of everything centralized and top down. So instead of just approaching it from a perspective of, oh, we're just going to make it top down like every other organization out there, we're trying to sort of approach it more from a, contractors and a collective perspective, more like a government than a corporate entity.
Right. And so the way that, for people who don't know, the way that the dev subsidy works is that it's part of every block. So 10% of every block comes into that dev fund. So that's like 21,000 Decred a month coming in, right? Which is like $500,000. So we're sitting on 10 million bucks. We've got $500,000 a month coming in to do dev work or marketing or whatever we can fathom. I mean, that's pretty significant. And considering that this is all self-funded, I mean, not too many projects have that kind of staying power. I mean, you have crypto projects where they basically need to beg devs to do work because, well, they have no money, right? I mean, how does a project fund itself? long
I mean,
term?
it's a great question. I mean, that was a question I was asking myself in the context of Bitcoin back in 2013, 14, and 15, which is that basically what I saw is there's some really bright people who work in the Bitcoin space, whether they're Bitcoin core devs or they're BTC suite devs. There's a whole bunch of really bright people in the space. And one of the, it's the classic tragedy of the commons, which is that you have this great idea, you have this great technology, but then it becomes a question of, well, who the hell is going to pay to build it all out? And, I saw it firsthand, basically, BTC suite, we thought it was really important work, but no one was ever going to pay us to do it unless we basically raised venture capital money and made a lot of promises and then, presumably productized it in a way that, was amenable to our investors. And I felt like that was a sort of a betrayal of the, sort of the ideas behind Bitcoin, which is, to decentralize
no one would ever
things.
do something like that.
Yeah, no, no one would ever do something like that. I don't know why they would do that or patent it all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's totally confusing to me. I mean, I didn't see much merit to going that route myself. I know some others did, but I didn't. And I think that this tragedy of the commons is something that when we were working on Decred, we were like, we've got to fix this no money problem for development and infrastructure. So that's where this idea came from, is basically being Bitcoin developers and being like, we're never going to get paid. So, maybe we should make a system where we do get paid. That would be nice.
It's interesting because, I think at first glance, it kind of turns people off. 10% of the money is going for dev, but it's actually probably one of the best features that's going to guarantee that Decred's around, in 5, 10, 20 years. The fact that it's A, adaptable with hard fork voting, and B, you can actually fund some things. I mean, most projects are expecting, devs to already be loaded with coins and want to work, right? We can actually bring in people who don't have a position, don't have bags loaded and an incentive, and give them an incentive essentially with Decred as equity.
Exactly. And I mean, I think in the long term, it's sustainability is really a big part of what we're trying to do with Decred, because it's like, you look at Bitcoin and it's very inflexible. It doesn't adapt. It's very static. And that's good in some ways, right? You at least have some confidence that it's not going to change, but you also know it's not going to change. So it's like it's a feature and a bug at the same time.
Right. They're spinning it as digital gold now. The fact that it'll never have any new features and it's just a clunky store of value.
Oh man. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about all that, but yeah, I mean, in terms of the whole contractor game, it's like we're just trying to switch it up in instead of basically making this a top down, like I'm always going to be in charge. It's like, no, ultimately, the way this whole operation is going to run is it's going to be decentrally managed via the stakeholders for the most part.
Okay, let's talk about some of those contracting positions, because a lot of people are asking questions about, I don't know Go, or I don't know this, or I don't know that. And let's talk about the doers wanted aspect, because I know a lot of people, our most valuable members of the community started off, doing little things and hacking on the code and becoming familiar with it and slowly working their way. And so it's not really a process where, I send you my CV and you hire me and you start paying me X. I mean, a lot of people slowly ease into the work, correct?
That's right. What we've been doing is, I have some experience with open source projects. I wasn't directly involved in the OpenBSD project, but I did work with, I did and do work with a number of the former, and current developers of it. And the game there is that open source projects necessarily have people coming and going. Not everybody's going to work full time for the project forever.
Right.
Some people are like, I have another job and I don't want to get paid in cryptocurrency forever. So in terms of developers and onboarding and sort of this I give you a resume, you give me a job dance. We're more of the feeling that the people who contribute most significantly to a project like Decred are the people who show up and are just interested in the project. And so as a function of that, we're trying to focus on those people more so than people who just want to show up, hand us their CV, and have a 9-to-5 where they do cryptocurrency day in, day out. So we obviously want people to work full time, but we don't feel the need to basically solicit only people who will work full time on this stuff. So it's sort of, we're trying to sort of start from the community to go like, are you interested in this community, in this space? And then build up from there. And then, in terms of onboarding, nobody, I mean, the trouble with a new domain like cryptocurrency is no one went to school for it. No one's like, oh, I majored in cryptocurrency at Harvard. People are like, oh, I do a little bit of cryptography. I do a little bit of computer security stuff. I think this is interesting. And then they figure it out. And, we're trying to sort of adapt to that process rather than try to, turn it into bricklaying. You can't turn it into bricklaying until you have a whole crew of people who know how to lay bricks. So we're trying to teach people how to lay the bricks. That's sort of where we're at right now.
I think that's great. I mean, the community is very receptive, and you see it the way the devs handle, even the most basic elementary questions, and they're very accommodating and never hesitate to give people that, little extra bit of information that'll help get them up to speed. So I think that's a great way of bringing on devs as well, because when people see that open atmosphere, they're really attracted to the project and think, hey, this might be something I want to contribute to. Like you said, maybe even on a temporary basis. I mean, that's fine. Having a developer army of 100 people who all want to give a few hours a month is even better than having maybe 100 full-time developers in some way.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of classic sayings that can be inserted here, like many hands make light work. And it's very easy to get down about the process and really try to make it centralized. But, ultimately we'll be way stronger in the long run by not being centralized. I would love for there to be other corporate entities that show up and, grind stuff out as contractors. And I don't even necessarily mean in terms of, someone having a contractor, being a contractor that only works on Decred. You can work on a whole bunch of things in the cryptocurrency space. Come and give us some of your labor, some of your time, some of your staff, and we'll pay you for it, and we'll build it together, as opposed to it just being sort of a yet another monoculture.
Could you see, Company Zero not being the main Decred developer, pushing the most code and the most features, within the next 5 years even?
I think I could see that, and the reason is this: is that it's not that we don't like the work we do. It's that, I mean, if you've ever run a business yourself, the crown is heavy. It is no joke to be in charge of stuff, because when things go wrong, guess what? Guess who people are looking at? They're looking at you. They're looking at your staff. They're looking at your organization. Oh, what are you doing wrong? And it becomes, and I mean, having that kind of, level of, critical, critical perspective always put on you and your work product it's a pressure cooker. And I could see in the long run, I would really be quite happy for Company Zero to be one of several contractors who work on Decred, because I think that a diversity of opinions will make for a better system here. In a sense, Decred is meant to be sort of a digital state where everybody meets in the middle, rather than being like, oh, we're going to fight over the border. Oh, what are you doing in my ocean? What are you doing on my island? Get off that island. We're like, there's no islands, there's no ocean, there's just this blob of coins, and then we can kind of meet in the middle here, as opposed to trying to do it under, sort of a nation state boundaries.
And we actually have a mechanism for deciding all those little arguments that are inevitably going to come up, correct? Yeah.
Precisely. And so, that's really the big picture. And I would really be very happy to have other corporate contractors show up. It would be, I think it would be very nice. What we have is, like right now, there's two corporate contractors. There's ITER. I hope I didn't horribly mispronounce it. It's an Estonian design company, and there's us at Company Zero, and we're the two current corporate contractors. In terms of, most everybody else that we've worked with so far has been an individual contractor. And, we can do that, but it just, in the longer run, it's harder to scale that, because, then the project has to manage dozens of independent people, as opposed to, let's say, several dozen contractor outfits that sort of, function like sort of better behaved people.
Right. And it makes sense to have, an entity in charge of, let's say, X employees, and being accountable to that entity as a contractor. Right now, I'm not sure how many contractors we have working on Decred, but there's kind of some ambiguity sometimes about who's working on what and who's officially being a contractor and who's, just a hobbyist.
Yeah, who's working on what? Who's responsible? Who is responsible for what? I mean, if you look at it from the perspective of responsibility, companies are typically a lot better. If you sign a contract with a company that says the company will do X, it's a lot easier to manage that company and that contract than it is to manage the 10 employees underneath it and go like, what are all you guys doing? Like, oh, you're not doing that right. So from a management perspective, it's just a lot less drama to have to deal with corporate entities in this context. And something I'll just say here in case anybody's watching is that no one's watching. It's Google. If anyone who, we have no problem contracting with larger corporations as well. I mean, if someone, from IBM or Google or Facebook or whatever wants to contract and do this work with us, they're welcome to it. I'm a small outfit kind of person myself, but I think that in the long run, this is all about basically creating a digital commons that we all build up together. And so, from that perspective, hey, if anybody wants to show up and hack on it or, work on it in other ways, they're welcome to.
Cool. It's kind of the way a state might even put out calls for contractors to come and bid on projects or make proposals and pick and choose some of the best ones and help us adapt that way.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's sort of the approach we're trying to take here. Is we're trying to take the government approach with a little bit more enlightened position. We're not trying to create like an entitlement trough that we all feast on. We're trying to sort of
$100 wrenches.
$100 wrenches. How dare you try to use $100 wrench on my $300 bolt? You need the $1,000 wrench. I mean. We're not trying to create that, but at the same time, there is something to be gleaned from that kind of infrastructure. The request for proposal, the request for quote, and like various types of contracts. These things are really relevant, and I think that we should do what we can to learn from other organizations that have been through this same sort of process where you have incoming revenue in some form of payments. In our case, it's from it's from a subsidy from these blocks or from tax income, and then you got to go, okay, well, people they give you some money, now they want something in return, and so you got to try to find got to build roads and you got to build schools and hospitals, and that's what we're trying to do here. Is we're trying to sort of be a good steward for this stuff.
I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but you have any ideas about things you might like to see get done from other contractors? Let's say code, features, things that maybe you guys don't have time for yet?
Oh, yeah. I mean, something that we would really love is anyone who's interested in doing, either general auditing or security auditing of the code would be a huge help. I know that there's a variety of people who do that. Not everybody has Golang skills, but it's the sort of thing that even if you're skilled in C or C++, you can pick up Go in pretty short order. So it's not, you don't have to be a total wizard to know it. People who can do the usual low-level C stuff can pick it up pretty quickly. Something else, that we would be very keen to do is we're definitely looking for more marketing and advertising and sort of community outreach talent. We have a lot of people who are doing good work there, but it's one of these things where right now it's very grassroots. It's not very systematic, and the more systematic we can make it, the better. In the sense that we're trying to reach people, and that's a tall order in the cryptocurrency community. It's difficult because there's so many different coins, and they're all they all make all these wild claims and white papers, and I'm gonna start a dog washing service with a smart contract, and it'll update a million times every 4 seconds, and it's like, well, wow, like what are you doing? I'm raising $100 million to do it, and it's like, okay.
Or how about founding a nation state and opening your own bank?
Oh yeah, opening your own bank.
We've come full circle. Yeah, they're funding. They're doing ICOs so we can get banking licenses now. This is what it's come to.
Wow. Wow, you have an ICO so you can spy on people. Congratulations. I don't know. I mean, there's so much going on in the cryptocurrency space that there's
it's
a lot
hard
of
to differentiate yourself.
It's hard to differentiate yourself, and it's hard to really connect with people, because a lot of people just have this outset where it's like, oh, everything is a scam. And it's like, as much as I made the joke about the dog washing smart contract, not every project is like that, but it takes someone, who has like a real technical eye to determine basically a scam from a not scam. And so it's hard for us, because a lot of people will show up and be like, oh, this sounds like a scam, so it probably is a scam. And it's like, well, take a little bit to look at it. And, we're really not running a scam. We're running an above board ship here. So it's like, in terms of, outreach and, also, code. I mean, we're short on Golang developers. People who develop Go aren't super common, but, we really could use more people.
We had someone actually on Reddit suggesting, we go do some Golang conferences, maybe sponsor them, maybe take out ads of some kind. What do you think about that?
I think that's a fine approach. I mean, the way we've been approaching everything with community outreach so far has been sort of a spaghetti launcher, a many-faceted spaghetti launcher approach, where we launch spaghetti in many directions. A lot of it doesn't stick. We find what sticks, and we keep doing that. So, going to Golang conferences or trying to target Golang developers, via advertising or whatever, that sounds like a totally viable avenue, and I think we should throw some spaghetti at it.
That's an interesting approach, but I really like the fact that, our community, well, we have a kind of a dual-pronged approach. Our community has, the ad hoc approach, where people are out there, tweeting, doing their own thing on social media. And we have, professionals like a PR firm or even a marketing firm that could come on and put us on, a very straight and traditional path. I think it's great to have both. And you see with a lot of coins, they've went one way as opposed to the other. And it's just, corporate and advertisements, and all they care about is trying to get those investors on and to keep perpetuating their investment. But, yeah, I think having the organic side is really what stands out about the Decred community, because you see it when people get in on the Slack and, they get on board and they see you got a big friendly community and people willing to help you. And it really resonates with people, I find.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like our community is really quite strong. It's just, the only thing that I feel like is that grassroots is great. I love the grassroots approach, and we've been really taking that angle for, basically since launch. So we haven't cozied up to giant VC investors. We haven't, done a lot of paid advertising. There's a lot of other things that we haven't done. We haven't gone to a whole bunch of conferences and given big talks about how our technology is going to, wash your dog for you. We're going to need to, so we're going that route more over the past several months. I've been giving more talks. I've been more public. I mean, I'll be honest. I'm really not very fond of being on Google, as I suspect you're not. But
not at all. I don't know who. Figure it out so you can fire them. Who said? You guys are doing the Decred assembly. I mean, I'm the last person who should be doing this, and for some reason I was nominated. So that's like a cruel joke.
Yeah, I mean. I'll show. I mean, people really want me to show up and contribute like this, and I think that people want someone to do it, whether it's you or someone else. And so it's like, it's not my favorite thing to do, but I'll do it because no one else is doing it. This is something that I feel like a lot of people who haven't run their own business don't see, but when you do your own, when you're the backstop for a business, you own it. Let's say something isn't happening, something isn't going right. You can't snap your fingers and be like, oh, why isn't marketing going right? And just start complaining. You have to actually solve the problem, and that's a lot of work. So,
I thought that was the same thing, complaining and solving problems.
What do you mean? I can't just complain about a problem until it's solved? Oh my God. So I feel like, and this also connects back to the doers versus people who just show up with resumes. If we're running in the context of a private business, you can hire someone based on their resume, and it's kind of a dice roll. Sometimes they're very bad and you have to fire them. Sometimes it just takes forever for it to not work out, and so on. So in the case of an open source project like this, we have the luxury of not being in a position where we have to hire someone to test them out. We can go, hey, look at all this stuff here. find something you want to do and work on it. As opposed to, a private business, you're not going to be like, hey, look at all my private company papers and find something you want to work on before you start working for me. So, I feel like, we do have some advantages over, the usual process.
Tangentially related, someone was asking in Reddit about the idea of being an anonymous contributor. Would you be open to having contractors, who don't want to, use their real identity and just want to contribute, and could they be compensated?
I think that for right now, with the centralized entities, that's difficult from the perspective of bookkeeping, which is that if people are entirely anonymous, it puts Decred Holdings Group in an awkward position. Basically, when you don't know who you're working with, there's a whole bunch of sort of unpleasant surprises that could be in store for you once you start paying that person. Is that person on a watch list? Is that person specially designated, and so on? So, right. There are these caveats to...
You guys do some due diligence when you're dealing with contractors.
That's right. Now, in the future, once we go to the DAO, this is possible, but we have to be, we also have to be reasonable about it. Like, there are some people who want to contribute anonymously to the source code. Now, in certain areas of source code, that's okay, that's fine. It's not mission critical stuff. But if you're the person who anonymously wants to be tinkering with consensus code,
yeah,
probably not. You're probably, you gotta go take a hike. That's the, so that's sort of, there are certain positions. Like, for example, if you want to be the marketing lead, but be anonymous, that's probably another one where it's like, we don't know who you are. You might try to crash our project into a rock. And then there's no accountability for you when something bad happens. So I think that working with anonymous collaborators is definitely a possibility, but not until the DAO conversion happens, and only in certain circumstances. Because, if the circumstances are wrong, it's basically, it sets us up for serious problems. Like, for example, if you're running an operating system and you have someone who wants to stay anonymous, but also commit like kernel code on the regular, it's a little bit of a conflict. So if you were anonymous and you happen to be malicious and you wanted to insert junk into someone's kernel and make their machine remotely exploitable, well, then you could do that. And then guess what happens when people find out it was your code? Nothing, because you're anonymous.
Right. You want the people who are developing to have some skin in the game and their reputation on the line to some extent. So it's definitely a delicate balance. I could see someone with a pseudonym who's well respected in the community maybe contributing, but it would have to be somebody who has a history and a track record. I mean, a lot of Decred's lineage comes from anonymous contributors as well. So I mean, obviously
that's right. And I mean, even in that context, I had a prerequisite, which was that I had to meet everybody in person before the ball started rolling for real. And that's part of the process that I put into it. I mean, there's still ways you can dance around that, but I have met everyone. So
that's comforting.
It's yeah. I mean, I'm not gonna Jimmy the Cutout isn't gonna be welcome. I gotta meet Jimmy the Cutout, right?
He's got to be well versed on his legend and the script to be able to convince you.
Exactly.
He can dance. All right. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other features, though, because a lot of people are excited about the update that you guys did on the roadmap. Lightning's a big one. I know a lot of people are excited about the idea of cross-chain atomic swaps in some of our smart contracts. So we talk a little bit about smart contracts, because everyone's excited about that. Every ICO out there has a new take on smart contracts. And I mean, there's been a lot of great discussion on the Slack. I've learned a lot about, why Turing complete smart contracts are a terrible idea. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that and talk about how Decred's going to be doing smart contracts with Lightning.
Sure, which is that, I mean, even though people don't talk about it in this context, Bitcoin has smart contracts and has had smart contracts since zero. So someone had quite a bit of foresight in that regard. So basically, opcodes exist in Bitcoin to allow you to do pretty interesting things with Bitcoin transactions. Now, despite that, there's a filter, there's a standardness filter that basically filters out all these non-standard transactions. So the way it works with Bitcoin is that there's all this infrastructure to make smart contracts, but it's all disabled by merit of the mempool relaying. So they're like, oh, well, if you have a wacky jacky contract in here, we're going to disable that. We're not going to mine. We're not going to relay it in the mempool, and we'll bounce it from mempool, and then it will never get mined. However, if you know a miner, you can get some of these transactions mined. So that's just sort of the base starting point. Decred inherited this this existing infrastructure. Now, Lightning Network is, as far as I'm concerned, the single most actually useful smart contract that has been developed to date, in the sense that it takes it takes these normal transactions. There's P2PK and P2PKH and P2.
Right, you did a great blog post outlining a lot of the possibilities for Lightning. I mean, I'm not going to make you go through the whole thing, but if you touch on it a little bit, because people should check that out on blog.decred.org. The Lightning smart contract.
Okay, so let's see if I can keep this shorter then. Lightning Network is the most useful smart contract that's been made to date. Now, you don't need Turing-complete smart contracts to get Lightning Network, which to me calls into question, do you really need Turing completeness to have useful smart contracts? And my observation with Ethereum, Ethereum you can in principle do anything with, but in practice all anybody does is ICOs with it and decentralized exchange of the ICOs. And so it really, for me, calls into question the utility of all of this, breadth that you get from the Turing completeness. And then, the trade-off with adding Turing completeness is that it's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to actually test everything. Because once you start going, okay, this isn't Turing complete, then you really have no clue what's going to happen. Even when you put a cutoff in place to be like, oh, the script's got to stop running after n seconds or n minutes. It's still this question of, well, how do you test it? How do you know if it's behaving correctly? How do you know if your compiler is going to handle it right? How do you know if the virtual machine is going to handle it right? How do you know the virtual machine isn't going to be broken out of and it's going to get into somebody's computer and rip that thing up? So the way I see smart contracts is that Turing completeness just basically adds a lot more danger and challenge in testing for not a huge gain. I think it's interesting to see how things like Ethereum have progressed. So I just see Turing-complete smart contracts as mostly hype. That's really my view of it, which is that any truly useful application of smart contracts, guess what? Ethereum gets it, then you can add it to Bitcoin. You could add it to Decred. And so I see Turing completeness as a bit of a red herring.
Right. So now one of the coolest things that people are looking forward to with Lightning is the idea of cross-chain atomic swaps. Can you talk a little bit about that, why that's so interesting, and how that could eventually disintermediate and cause the exchanges to not even really be necessary?
That's right. So fiat to virtual exchanges would still be necessary,
right,
or there needs to be some vector for spreading the coins around that doesn't involve an exchange. So that said, if we're talking virtual to virtual, what it does is that cross-chain atomic swaps, there's two kinds. There's on-chain atomic swaps, and then there's off-chain atomic swaps. On-chain atomic swaps basically allow you to lock coin, coin one on chain one, or UTXO one on chain one, depending if there's UTXOs or if it's a radix tree or whatever. And then you can also lock coin, set of coins two on chain two, and then you can swap these in a way that's trustless, so that basically you don't need a third party. And this is, basically what that describes is the settlement mechanism for a decentralized exchange. So like you could have positions on, and then maybe lock coins, you get a match on some positions, then an on-chain atomic swap occurs. Now, the utility of off-chain atomic swaps is really latency versus the on-chain stuff. The on-chain stuff is always going to be bound by the the block times on these chains, so that if the chains are moving slow or 10 minutes or whatever, there's only so much time resolution you're going to be able to get for the atomic swap. So it can happen, but there's sort of latency constraints and timing constraints. Whereas off-chain, it's really it's near instant. It's not going to be milliseconds or microseconds or nanoseconds, but it would be, I'd expect in a matter of tens or hundreds of milliseconds, you could do the off-chain atomic swaps.
I'd be willing to wait minutes to eliminate counterparty risk. I mean, that doesn't seem like a bad trade-off.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't. But, something else to consider when it comes to decentralized exchange is that there are the problem isn't completely nailed to the ground, right? Like on a normal centralized exchange, you end up having things like, there's an order book. How do you prevent spoofing in the order book? How do you prevent, people from, oh, there's a match. Now it's time, to do the swap. How do you prevent somebody from backing out, or, basically doing these late game cancels, which which people do a lot on exchanges, especially when they're unregulated. So, I don't know how well answered those questions are in the context of the decentralized exchanges that exist, but I'm very excited for the technology, because I think it'll do a lot to stabilize altcoins especially.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. It's definitely something to watch. Another thing, I know a lot of people are interested in the idea of ticket splitting. And recently, I don't remember which dev it was, but someone mentioned, it might have been yourself actually, the idea that on Lightning you could even do micro splitting of tickets. So you wouldn't have to use the existing infrastructure to split a ticket 32 ways. You could actually do it using Lightning. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so the way Lightning works, roughly speaking, is that you open and close these channels. These channels, basically, it's your gateway into the Lightning network. You put some of your funds, and potentially your counterparty puts some funds into a channel. Those funds get locked. Then basically commitments get written from that channel to other channels, and within that channel. And so those funds move back and forth between you and someone else in the Lightning network, a node, let's say. So what could happen conceivably is that someone could open a channel to fund a ticket. Everyone can start to pay into it using their commitments over the Lightning network. So it's like, let's say it's, whatever it is, roughly right now, 64, 65 coins a ticket. They open a channel for exactly the size of the ticket. Then they start basically receiving commitment payments into the ticket until it's completely full. Then when the ticket is full, now this is the open question part. Getting those commitment payments into a channel, from end counterparties into one channel, that part is doable. But then the question of how do you safely then split the rewards from that ticket after it's been voted, and then the question of who's going to vote it and things like that. So the rough idea is that you would be able to use the Lightning network to conceivably split a ticket, a near infinite number of times. So you could take a single ticket, split it hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of times, so that people with even vanishingly small amounts of coins can participate in the staking system. I know that it's been, basically people have been upset about, I want to be able to stake with $100, and it's like, we want you to be able to stake too, but we don't want to make a big dev detour to enable that, only to really get to this idea of micro staking later on, like let's say maybe 6 months from now.
But what if everyone on Reddit wants it? Come on.
Ooh, bro. People on Reddit want a lot of things, and we try to meet them in the middle when we can. Sometimes the requests are very reasonable. This ticket splitting thing, it's non-trivial. And basically every week or every dev week or dev month that gets spent on that is another month that we don't have Lightning, that we don't have privacy, that we don't have the DAO completed. So the way I see it is that we've got some really big items on our ticket, and not to beat the ticket term to a death, but we got some big ticket items on our list, and we just don't want to derail or delay those just so people can be like, I have $100 and I'm staking now, and it's like, great, okay, well now everything else is a month late or 2 months late.
Right. I don't see why you would want to stake if the coin is stagnant, because the devs just wasted 6 months implementing a feature that's only going to be used by very few people.
Yeah, and we hear what people are saying, and we really do want to build that infrastructure. It's just a question of it's a question of sequencing. Like if you've ever watched somebody build a house, people are like, I want like this awesome finishing. I want like a steam shower, and it's like, dude, we're putting up the framing. We'll get to the steam shower once we get to the point where we're putting all the other pieces in, and we're putting the drain in and the shower head. Then we can start talking steam. The steam. The steam shower. It's like, I get it that you guys want that, but in terms of a sequencing from a sequencing perspective, you can only build things in a certain order, and it's like And what, we're going to stop the framing so that we can build your steam shower? It's like, no, we got to get these other things out of the way.
Back to Lightning a little bit. Maybe we can talk about some of the other things that it would enable. Basically, I know that there has been some talk of having prediction markets or futures markets built on top of Lightning, right? Where you also would not have counterparty risk. Is that something that either you guys would be open to developing yourselves, or something we could maybe create a proposal for eventually?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that from a technology perspective, things like prediction markets are very interesting. There's a lot of money in them, and there's a lot of people who like to gamble. I'm not one of them. I gamble enough with my job, like doing this cryptocurrency stuff. It's all a bit of a gamble. But if other people want to gamble, I have no problem with that, and I think it would be a pretty reasonable kind of proposal to make. But just like with all the proposals, it's kind of a bring your own dev situation. So if there's a dev team that wants to build an outside product that's relevant to Decred, this could happen. I guess the other thing that I'll say about Lightning Network that I don't know if I've announced publicly, but we are likely going to make a release in less than 1 month with the Lightning Network updates in it. So basically, it will be up for vote in the next month-ish.
That's pretty cool to hear.
I figured I'd put that towards the end, just so that if people bother to watch all the way to the end, they get some information.
You got something out of it.
Yeah.
This was not a waste of your time. Lightning in 1 month.
Yeah. So basically, there's a very recent pull request from Dave Collins that basically adds check sequence verify and all of the corresponding tests that's been synced from BTCD to DCRD. And apparently, and I say apparently just because I wasn't dead certain of it until very recently, we have our own version of SegWit already from launch, and we have check lock time verify, which is CLTV. So basically, the only missing ingredient we have is check sequence verify, and we'll be putting that up for vote in the not so distant future.
Very cool, Jake. We're ending on a high note with Lightning. We can't top that now. So thank you very much for joining us on the Decred Assembly, and hopefully the next episode we'll have Matt back at the helm here. We'll have a better structure again. Thanks a lot, Jake.
Thank you, sir, and it's always a pleasure talking to you. I will catch up with everyone else on the internet over text, and where it doesn't involve a Google camera in my face.
I'll see you on ZKST. Take care.
Are we done?